Welcome one and all, it's time for another Deadzone tournament report. This time, Black Dragon Energy Inc. from Black Dragon Miniatures. And here we go, 200 points of red hot sizzling Deadzone action, 4 games, 12 players, and let's dive straight into my list. So in fact, before I tell you about my list, let's have a very quick rundown of the rules for this tournament. So, regarding scoring, it's 3 points for a win, 1 for a draw, nothing for a loss. You get a bonus point if you kill the enemy leader, and you also get bonus points based on how many victory points you scored during the game. So if you get more than 25 or more victory points in the game, you get a bonus of 4 points, which is quite significant. And if you score very few, you're going to get a very small bonus. So obviously you want to be scoring as many as possible. You don't just want to settle for that 20 if you've got the opportunity, because the game will of course end if someone hits 20. So you want to try and maximise and get to 25 if you can, if it's not too risky to hold out a bit longer. So we'll see if that comes up here. In my list we've got the Plague Lord, the Stage 1A Plague Lord. I don't think I took him to the last tournament, and giving him a bit more of a try in this new edition. And his splat is pretty useful with the different mutations he can put onto your units. Also, getting an extra command dice is nice, and of course he is just an absolute beast as well, very difficult to take down. A Stage 2A Leaper, and I haven't taken many of these lately either, but with the Frenzy on there, maybe they're worth a bit more of a run out now. We've got 5 Hellhounds, just nice, cheap, fast, can go after weak enemy targets and jump onto objectives for a very low cost. We've got 2 Mortar teams. So the reason for the Mortar teams is because at the moment, what we consider to be a bit of a meta emerging, potentially, is kind of small, fragile missile launcher carrying units. And the way I think about dealing with that is dropping mortar shells on them immediately. If they can't survive that much, a mortar direct hit potentially can kill them. I'm thinking mostly about the Asterian ciphers with missile launchers. They've obviously only got 1 hit point, so a mortar landing on them has got a pretty decent chance of killing them in one go, and I think they're worth 3 victory points each. So that's what the mortars are in here to counter that kind of enemy threat, because obviously missile launchers with their big AP on their ranged weapon is quite a big threat to a lot of my units that I want to keep alive, for example the Teratons and the Plague Lord. So we've got 2 Teratons here, 2 Plague Teratons, so I've got 3 size 3 kind of advancing fighty units. So there's obviously a risk there, because if there's too many half cubes they can't actually enter them. They can still punch people in those cubes though now, which is nice and makes it a bit less of a risk to take more of the big stuff, which is always fun. And then we've got a Plague Swarm, because Plague Swarms are very good. Could only fit 1 in though. I do often take 2, but I wanted to get the second mortar in this time instead. So I think that is quite a tasty list on paper here. So for the fighting we've got the Teratons, Plague Swarm, Plague Lord if he ever gets there. The Leaper's pretty good as well. Hellhounds are also decent if you can pick the right target for them. And for shooting, we've only got the 2 mortars, but I say only, but 2 mortars is pretty damn potent. As we move on to game 1 here. So, this is the area denial scenario. And in that scenario, you set up in 2 corners, in this little corner shape here, in each corner. So it's quite a struggle for me to fit into limited deployment areas, because I've got a lot of size in my models, and many of them can't share. So it's a bit tricky, I'm a bit limited in where I can put them. So you can see I've got my Plague Lord over here with a dog, I've got a mortar on its own, I've got a dog and a Plague Swarm in there. This side is very limited. On this side I've got a bit more opportunity because there's an extra roof, an extra layer up there. So I've got a mortar and a dog down there, I've got a Teraton under there, a Teraton at the back, and 2 dogs and a Leaper up there. And you can see where the objectives are in relation to my forces. So the Plague Lord is down here. Over here is where I've got the Teratons. There's a 2-point objective up on there. But that's a half cube, so some of my dudes won't be able to get up there. I've got another one here. Another 2-point objective. There's a 1 point there, a 1 point there, and there's also one in this cube and in this cube down here. So all the 1-point objectives are on ground level. The only one off the ground is this 2, which is only accessible to... Who would I want to send up there? If there's no threats, then a dog would be good. Otherwise, the Plague Swarm and the Leaper could be good options for going up there. I'm against the Enforcers. So we've got the dog, the laser dog. We've got several regular Enforcers. We've got one with a missile launcher there. We've got some of the Ranger scouting troops as well. And there are also, under the buildings, there are some Defender Shield carrying units, including the leader, I think, has a Defender Shield. So they're perched under there. Quite a lot starting off underneath. They don't want to get mortared, obviously, because that would have been a really bad idea to get mortared there. I can't remember if there's 2 missile launchers. There may well be. But whenever I see missile launchers, that's where I'm thinking that's where the mortar's going to land immediately if I get the opportunity. And yeah, you can see the other ground level objectives there. So for the command dice in the first round, I've got a couple of extra activations, which is always good if you've got some mortars, or if it's at the start in a later turn, if you want to get multiple fights in at once before the enemy has a chance to do anything. So turn 1, I'm not sure 2 is that great for me. 1 would be enough, so I can fire off both my mortars. Shoot dice, I could have used 2 of those, 1 each for the mortars. And also, if someone happens to suppress a mortar, then obviously I can always stand it up and then use a shoot dice to allow it to shoot once. So it's nice to have shoot dice when I've got 2 mortars, and it means they're not going to be too wasted. Fight dice, which is going to be useless in the first round, except for rerolls, and a splat, which is going to be useful if I want to make anyone a bit tougher when they're moving forwards, probably. And my opponent's got an extra activation, a splat, which I believe allows a free sprint to Enforcer units. I think that's right. And an extra dice, and a shoot dice, which is obviously useful. So the first activation goes to me, and the mortar is going to fire off immediately. You can see I've already used my shoot dice and an activation dice. So what have I accomplished with both my mortars? So I've knocked down a missile launcher, which is nice because quite often these kind of units need a long action to shoot. And I've knocked down the dog from there. And I think I was trying to shoot at that person there maybe, and it scattered onto the dog. And the dog ended up falling down there. I believe that was how it happened. Something along those lines. So not too much damage done, but I've knocked various units down. The Teraton has advanced up, and I've put Resilient on it, in case anyone shoots it through the window. So I'll show you where I've moved up to in a minute. The dog is going to stand up and shoot, and it's going to pin my mortar, which is already fired, but it does mean that next turn I'm going to have to use a dice to allow it to shoot, hopefully. You can see my leap has gone onto the 1-point objective there, just inviting the enemy to come and shoot him, really. And the dogs do not want to go onto the objectives yet. I'm going to wait until as many enemy models have activated as possible, so that there's less chance of them being gunned down on the objectives. We've got a human hand reaching in here. So my Teraton is quite close to the enemy. So the enemy leader is right under here. And the Teraton, next turn, is going to be able to teleport and hopefully take out multiple enemy models if they don't do anything about it. This ranger here has popped out and gunned down one of the dogs before it has a chance to do anything. Now, I'm not too concerned in Deadzone when I lose models, cheap models, before they get to act, because it's going to help me to have a chance of going first in round 2. Because if you finish activating all your models first in round 1, then you'll go first in the next round. So if people are going to be shooting off my dogs that were no threat to them in this turn, because they're not going to be able to reach them, if they're going to shoot them before they've activated, that's fine by me, because it's just going to give me a better chance to get my big stuff into the action at the start of the next turn. So, red hot tip for you there, for all you Deadzone players. So, the first turn, you can see the 2-point objective in the middle here. I threw 2 dogs onto it. I've got a Plague Swarm onto the 1-point objective, and the Leaper is on the 1 point objective there. My opponent, I think, is on which one? This one and that one. So just the 1 point objectives and kill the dog. So I'm currently in the lead, but only just. You can see I'm so used to facing Plague, I started writing Evil Plague there, but it's actually Enforcers. The next round. So I've got 3 fight dice, which is great for anything after the first round, because I'm going to be fighting in this turn, so I'm going to be able to use most of those. Movement, which is good as well. It's always useful for the Plague, especially if you've got a Plague Lord, who's very slow, obviously, and the extra activation, which is good, generally. And over here, my opponent's got an activation, an extra dice, a splat, and a move. So first things first, my Teraton leaps, well, it teleports onto the roof, kills the missile launcher, and then uses a move dice to move back down there and kill another Enforcer. So that's 2 models killed by the Teraton, and I'm also in the cube with that Ranger, so if it wants to do anything, it's going to have to try and escape and probably get punched into oblivion. And if anyone wants to shoot the Teraton, then they're going to have the negative modifier of having a friendly model in the cube. So unless it moves out the way, Teraton is having a very good time there. So 2 kills. In the middle, you can see I'm still sitting on all these objectives for the moment. What is my opponent going to do about that? Well, this Enforcer in here has now been attacked by the Plague Swarm. The Plague Swarm who has darted up here. It's in this area there. Because I've got lots of models that could contest this 1 point objective or jump onto it. So I'm feeling quite confident in abandoning that with the Plague Swarm to get some killing done. But I don't actually kill it in 1 round, which is a bit annoying. And as a result of my victory on the recon test, I was able to look at 1 crate. And I looked at this one and found that it had intel in it, which meant that I knew it was perfectly safe to pick it up, because I don't normally bother picking up items at all with Plague. Because most of them, if it's ammo for example, most of my units aren't going to be able to use it, and there's just a chance of it being a booby trap, so I don't bother typically. But I knew this one was intel beforehand, so the Plague Lord has grabbed it. So that's a nice free VP there. The Leaper has gone up onto the roof, which I believe was a result of the Leaper's agility, which allows you to move up an additional vertical surface. So made it up to the top. And we've left a dog on that 2 point, a dog on that 1 point. My leader is actually on fire. So this Enforcer has a flamethrower and has set the leader on fire there, which is not very nice, obviously. A dog lurking there. Now, the enemy have still got some models underneath these buildings, so they're not quite as thin on the ground as it looks at this stage. But it's not looking good for them, because I'm now up to 19 points, which is the dream, really. I'm in a really solid position. I'm almost certainly going to win, unless there's a complete disaster. So all I need to do is score 1 point in the next round to win. So what I can focus on is scoring as many points as possible to maximise those victory points and get the bonus tournament points that are associated with it. So, next round I've got extra activation, a shoot, a fight, an extra dice, and a splat. My opponent has got a limited number of dice now, because I think I was able to kill off the leader, and that's 2 extra dice and a shoot dice. So, my leader does get shot by, I believe, is it a missile launcher? It might be the second missile launcher. So 3 damage inflicted onto my leader, who is also on fire. So it would be a bit risky to try moving, probably. Over here, my opponent also moves up onto here with this Enforcer and is going to take a shot at the Teraton and actually kills it because it's in the open. You can see that the Ranger who was in there did try to break away from the Teraton and got punched in the face and killed, which is nice. So, but that did leave the open shot available, so that was taken and the Teraton is killed. My Mortar decides, you know what, we're going to just get onto an objective. Because it wasn't able to shoot because it had been pinned, I think. So it stood up, moved, and then I think I used a move dice to put it onto the objective. And is that right? Or did I just move and then use a shoot dice to shoot? One or the other. So it knocked down this guy. I think this is the missile launcher, which doesn't look like a missile launcher, but I think that's what it is. And the dog. So there's a wound been inflicted there as well with that mortar shot. And the leaper is going after this guy. Doesn't get the kill. It's looking very healthy though. I'm sitting on all the objectives. I've got quite a few kills in this round. And that is how it's going to end. Because, look at that dead pile for the enforcers. Yep. Very healthy indeed. The enforcers do get a few kills in the final round, but I got another 15, making it a 34-10 win, with a leader kill as well, which is maximum points in game 1. So, utterly dominant against the enforcers there. And moving into round 2, top of the table. So, game number 2. Now, this is the deep strike scenario. So, you can see the setup area is a line of 4 here, a line of 4 here. And for the enemy, it's a line of 4 here, and a line of 4 here. And the objectives are on the, not quite the back row. So there's an objective here, and one here. Or is it here? Somewhere around here. And you can only score points if you take the objectives on your opponent's half. So they're worth 4 each though. So the difficulty in reaching them and holding them is reflected in their high value. So the objectives I want to score are there, and I believe here. And you can see them against the Asterians. So we'll see if my list that was built entirely to counter the Asterians actually pays off here. So you can see that there is a, what's it even called? The drone mortar thingamajiggy? Yeah, let's go with that. There are 2 ciphers with missile launchers. One is down here. The other one, I believe, is over here somewhere. Can't see it at the moment. And there's also a Cypher Prime, is that right? 2 ciphers with missile launchers, 1 Cypher Prime there, who's the more fighty version. There's a couple of Kalishi, which are obviously very scary combat units. There's 2 Marionette Phantoms, which is quite scary as well. There's one here, I can't quite see where the other one is at the moment, and there are a couple of regular marionettes as well. So, I'm not sure whether to be pleased about this deployment style, because obviously I get my big fighty stuff in there faster, because look how close we are. But on the other hand, my mortars are going to be very close to things that could take them out quite easily in one go, like Kalishi, for example. And I had very limited options with my deployment. So you can see I had to put a mortar kind of out in the open, just looking at the enemy. I didn't win the recon rolls. My opponent's going to go first, which means I'm going to take some shooting first. And potentially, depending on the command dice, could get attacked in the first turn. I'm thankful that you can see my opponent doesn't actually have any move dice in this turn, because a Kalishi, let's see, 1, 2, 3, it would need a move dice to get into the mortar in the first turn, so it's not going to be able to do that. This one, let's see, this one might be able to. I'm not sure actually, because I think that's a solid wall, so it would have to go kind of that way. 1, 2, and the mortar's down here. So okay, I don't think the mortars can be reached, so that's worked out nicely for me. And I've got my Plague Lord there with a dog. I've got a couple of dogs at the back. I've got my Plague Swarm round the back somewhere, and I'm going to use that. I think you can see it. Can you? I think it's down here. I'm planning to use that to counter the threat of enemies that decide to come and try and take an objective at the back. And the Teratons are going to go forward and try and precision strike into vulnerable enemies. Plague Lord is just going to march forward and try and kill, and I'm going to try and mortar off all the weak 1 hit point units that are a big threat, for example the missile launchers. So that is my plan there. And you can see the Plague Swarm under there. So there's a door here as well. So the objective that's worth 4 points to my opponent is there. There's another one worth 4 points, which is here, maybe? Is that right, or is it here? It might be under the Teraton. One or the other, it's along the back here. And my opponent has got one there and one there. So neither of them are in half cubes, as far as I can tell. I think that's just terrain. It's not actually blocking the cube off. So I can get units into those cubes to get the 4 points. But at the moment I'm focused on killing. The main priority is to kill the missile launchers. They're a big threat. To kill the Kalishi as well if I get the chance. And I've got 2 activation dice, 2 shoot dice, which is good. I'm going to want those mortar shots, and an extra dice there. So the shoot dice are extra valuable here because my opponent's going first, so could potentially knock down or otherwise inconvenience my mortars. So they might need to actually move or stand up before they can shoot. So the shoot dice could be useful for that. My opponent's got shoot dice, extra activation, which is bad for me because it's going first. And there's a splat as well. So immediately a mortar is knocked down. I think this was from the enemy artillery. Knocked it down, 3 damage, which is lucky because it's still alive. And it's also out of sight now. And a Teraton is shot off with a missile launcher immediately though. There's the other missile launcher, jumped up onto the building, and then took out a Teraton in 1 shot, which is the kind of damage those things can do. So, Teraton dead. And is that the other Phantom off the table there? Don't know if it was killed already. Teraton dead. Moving up. And you can... oh no, this is the corpse pile here. So you can see that with my mortar, the first mortar here that fires, kills the Cypher with a missile launcher, the Cypher Prime, who is the leader, which is obviously great for this tournament. Hello to Zoltan in the chat there. And a Marionette. So the first mortar with 2 shots does all that. So I think that's 7 victory points. Just from 1 model shooting. Which is obviously very nice, and this mortar hasn't even got up and fired yet. Which I do now. Stand it up, use a shoot dice to fire, and kill the other Cypher missile launcher. That's 10 victory points immediately just from mortars. So the plan is definitely, I think it's 10. That guy might actually be 2 victory points, which would mean it's 9 in total. But still, the leader is dead, the 2 missile launchers are dead, the things I wanted to kill. This list was specifically built to counter those things, and it has proved to be a wise choice as they are instantly killed. Obviously you need to roll well with the mortars as well. The Teraton jumped up there and killed one of the marionettes, and also got into the cube with this thing, which means it's going to have to try and move if it wants to do anything. The Kalishi has gone up there, seeing the Teraton as a viable target, probably rightly so, because it's a bit of a combat beast, and does 1 wound to the Teraton. And down here, I've got a dog that's just moving into position, staying out of sight, ready to strike at something vulnerable shortly. I've moved my dogs into the middle, Plague Lord as well, everything's moving up a bit. And down here, the other Kalishi bounded into this cube with my Leaper and did a wound. So the Leaper is wounded, so what I'm planning to do is bring out the Plague Swarm from the back to attack the Kalishi shortly. So Plague Swarm is definitely something you could take them down with. Everything else tends to be a bit of a struggle. Leapers, probably not favoured in that matchup. Dogs, definitely not. Teratons, pretty good, but a Plague Swarm is the one you want in there. So after that round, I'm in the lead, but it's not a total blowout at the moment. It's currently 9-4 after the first round. So, an activation dice, a splat fight, which is good for the later turns, including this one, and some extra dice. My opponent, who is down a command dice after losing his leader, is now on 2 activations and a move, which is not too bad. So, we've got the Phantom working its way over here, kills a dog, and you can see that my Plague Swarm gets in there, kills the Kalishi, murders it, saving the Leaper. And this Phantom. So yeah, I think the other Phantom was was it underneath a building that we couldn't lift up, maybe? So it was just left off the table, something like that. That's why it was off the table, so it wasn't actually dead. And what else am I killing? So I think my dog kills a marionette down here, maybe. And also, the drone cannon thingamajiggy tried to move out of the cube, and the Teraton punched it in the face and killed it in one go. So, nice. So the enemy getting very thin on the ground, and at the end of this turn I'm going to be able to leap with 2 of my dogs onto both of the 4-point objectives, which is very nice indeed. You can see that the other Phantom did actually try and go after the Teraton, but got punched and took multiple wounds, but didn't die. So my opponent has only got 1, 2, 3, maybe a 4th model down here somewhere, maybe alive, not sure, may only be 3. But I was definitely going to win in this round if I got onto the objective. If I chose not to go on the objectives, I could have dragged it out a bit longer and maybe got more kills. But that is a risk, because these enemy units are very killy. So I would have lost my mortar. I would have lost maybe a Teraton. And who knows what else. So I decided to just try and end it here, jump onto the objectives, get those 8 points. And that is going to be that. So 25-5 result with a leader kill. So that is maximum points, reaching 25. There are no bonus points for the tournament ranking beyond getting 25. So once I figured out that was where I was going to land, I decided to just end it right there instead of going overkill and risking giving anything away. So, nice. So I'm at maximum points so far, still in the lead, and going on to round 3, which is the scatter scenario. And I'm going to be up against Plague. So it's going to be a Plague off. This scenario is notable as having not many points available for objectives. So there's a 1 up here, there's a 1 down there, there's a 1.5 cube there, and there's a 1.5 cube bridge there. So only 4 in total. So you'd have to commit 4 models to just accumulating 1 victory point a turn, if you're going to get those. So, let's see what my opponent's bringing. There is an HMG, which I do not have, and is obviously very good for suppressing things like Teratons that need to use long actions. There's a grenade launcher, which, same thing, really good for pinning enemies. There's a burster, which doesn't give away many victory points, but can do more damage when it's killed than when it's alive. There is a zombie, there's a dog, there's a Teraton down there. There's a Strider with a flamey weapon and a close combat weapon. There's the Plague Lord, same as mine, 2 more dogs, another zombie, and 1 mortar. So 1 mortar to my 2, 1 Teraton to my 2, but there is a burster and there's a Strider. Less dogs, zombies, and the Plague Lord is the same. So 2 very different lists with a few units the same. So I've got, in my favour, I've got Swarm, I've got extra mortars, I've got extra dogs, and I've got extra Teratons. So for my deployment, again, I'm a bit limited by where I can put things, and I don't want to put the Plague Lord too far back or he'll never get into the action. Got a mortar out of sight, and I've got the dogs up at the back here, Plague Lord up there. You have to deploy half your models in each of the opposite corners. So in this corner I've got the Plague Swarm at the front, ready to just go forward as fast as possible. I've got my Teratons under here, one of them hiding under cover so it can't get mortared. The Leaper up there, and a dog there. My mortar, one of my mortars, the other one was in this corner. The other one is here, underneath this kind of fan, so it can shoot out through the top. It could also be shot by a mortar, but it's also difficult for the enemy to reach it in there with any combat units. And it's also difficult for it to be shot with, for example, an HMG. A mortar would be a really good target for an HMG as well. So I lost the recon roll in this one, by the way, so I'm not going first. I've got 2 activation dice, a move dice, a fight dice, and an extra dice. So I could have done with some shoot dice, really, but I don't have them. My opponent's got 2, so his mortar's going to be able to shoot twice. Activation, move, and splat. And as you can see, this scenario does mean that you're factoring in a lot more angles of approach. So, what am I thinking here? I want to avoid the Plague Lord and the Strider. Thankfully, they're right next to each other, so it's going to limit the space I need to get away from. I don't want to fight either of them in close combat, really. That's just a waste of time. So I'm going to hope to kill everything else, because everything else is no match for the rest of my forces. So if I can dodge these 2, then I think I'm in with a decent chance. I'm going to try to prioritise killing these, the HMG and the grenade launcher, because they're going to cause me a world of pain, and they can also get around a bit and jump on objectives quite well. They're not big, so they're going to be able to get to these high up objectives and the ones on the half cubes. So they're going to be a priority. I outdog my opponent, so I think if there's a dog war, then I'll win it. The mortar war I'm fairly confident in. Well, I was until I didn't go first, so we'll see how it goes. If he could maybe kill one of mine immediately, I wouldn't be so confident. The plague swarm is a good little bit of utility because it'll totally annihilate anything my opponent has that's size 1, so it's a big threat to all of them. And it's also a big threat to the enemy Teraton. It's also a decent threat. If I could maybe knock down the Plague Lord, the Plague Swarm is actually a decent choice to go after it. The Strider, very limited circumstances where I'd want to engage that in close combat. Maybe my Plague Lord would go after it, but we'll see. So the enemy mortar opens fire, kills a dog and knocks down another one. So I was thinking it might have been shooting at my mortar, potentially, or he may have just shot at the dogs. But I think that one's knocked down, but it's not wounded. Then, next up, we've got, I believe the mortar fired again and knocked down, oh no, this wasn't, it was the HMG. The HMG knocked down the Leaper who was out in the open and pinned it, so he's going to be limited in where he can go now. Then, the mortar is now, let's see, the mortar, was that dude lying down in there before? No, he wasn't, so that means that the mortar is pinned. So I think I hit it with my mortar, didn't do any damage, but did suppress it. The grenade launcher now, which fires a once-in-a-lifetime shot, it missed what it was shooting at, it scattered into this cube, finished off the dog, and did 3 damage to my mortar. So you might think that this guy was shot, my Plague Lord, but he actually just jumped off the roof down there and pinned himself, because he can only move 1 cube anyway, so being pinned, as long as my opponent isn't charging into him, makes no difference to him whatsoever, because he can just stand up next turn and still move 1 cube. So leaping off a roof when you're not under threat of close combat is fine with a Plague Lord. There's my lesson for today. I'm getting my dogs onto the objectives. And an enemy dog charged into this dog after I was on the objective and was immediately killed, so I just rolled well there. So the dog off round 1 goes to me. I've got my Plague Swarm up onto this objective there. Teraton teleports into this building, ready to teleport out next time. And remember what I said earlier about dogs dying before they've activated is sometimes a blessing, because that means I'm going to be going first at the start of round 2, because some of my dogs were killed before they activated. So very nice, that means I'm going to be going first. And very close so far, just 1 point in it after the first round, but I think I'm in a good position to strike because I'm going first. I've got a dog down here who, there are ledges that you can't see down there, so he's going to be climbing up this tower and attacking the HMG. If I get an activation dice, I could also then use the Teraton to go up here and punch the grenade launcher, because he can't actually enter that cube, but he can still punch him. And that would be both of those taken care of immediately, which would be a very good start. I don't have to worry too much about the mortar unless my opponent gets a shoot dice, so we'll see what the dice say. So I've got movement. I could have done with a shoot dice, because one of my mortars is pinned as well. 2 extra dice, splat, and a fight. My opponent has a shoot dice, which is obviously good. Move dice, which is good for having a Plague Lord, and extra dice and fight. So, I do manage to pull off those 2 moves that I described. So, dog kills the HMG, Teraton jumps up there, punches the grenade launcher, kills it. So they're both dead, getting me a few VPs. You can see there's a dog fighting a zombie on the bridge. I think this zombie attacked the dog and actually wounded it. So I had a dog in this tower, which was making its way up towards the objective up here. The enemy Teraton teleported in there, attacked the dog, did nothing. Very disappointing for my opponent there. My Teraton then teleported into the cube and did 3 damage to the Teraton. So it's got 1 wound left, punches it out of the building, It lands on the ground and dies as a result of the fall. Lovely. So enemy Teraton dead. I've now got the Teraton Supremacy, which is quite a big deal tactically. If you can be teleporting around, covering great distances, with a move dice you can move 4, you're not limited by walls. You can do that and your opponent can't. It's quite a big deal. The fact that I activated those other models first earlier does mean that I allowed the Plague Lord to kill my Leaper, which is okay because it's not going to win the game. If the Plague Lord wants to spend a couple of turns going after my Mortar as well, that's absolutely fine, because it's not attacking anything else and it's not in the big fighty areas. Obviously it's going to get 3 VPs if it can kill it, if it can actually get there before the game ends. But overall, giving it things to kill while I'm killing everything else is probably fine. Leaper dead. My Plague Lord is moving up here, but he's now set fire to by the Strider, which I'm glad is moving around here instead of going for an objective, because if it was just sitting on an objective flaming my units, it would be just scoring slowly throughout the game and churning away, getting kills as well. But I suppose, since all the objectives are only worth 1 point, my opponent has decided that it's not worth earning 2 a turn and keeping the Plague Lord and the Strider stationary, potentially not doing much. Which is probably wise, but I think with a ranged unit like this, maybe it could have still done something while on the objective, maybe. Because it's not just the fact that they're only scoring 1, it's the fact that they also prevent me from using really cheap, useless units to just sit on objectives then. I can't charge a dog into an objective cube if it's got a Strider on it, for example. So it's kind of a deterrent to me scoring as well. So it's the scoring swing. Not only are you not scoring that one yourself, you're also depriving me of scoring 1. So it's really a swing of 2 rather than just the 1 point. So that's one way to look at it. But there's a bit of a dog off going on the roof there where we both get dogs up having a fight over that objective. I've got my Plague Swarm on this one. I've got my dog on this one. I've abandoned this one for the moment. And at the end of that turn, I've taken quite a healthy lead now. So it is now 11-5, which is nice. So I could aim to wrap it up in the next turn if I can get enough kills, but we'll see. 2 activations, 2 splats, and a shoot, which isn't bad. My opponent's got lots of shoot, which is not very good for him now because I've killed most of his shooting. And 2 activations. So my Mortar, you can see the Plague Lord closing in on it, but he didn't get any move dice, so he can't reach it yet. My Mortar immediately shoots. I'm not sure I actually did anything in this turn. Although, did it hit the enemy Mortar? Let's see where it was last time. Where's the enemy Mortar? Okay, there it is. So I did hit the enemy Mortar, in fact. Did 3 wounds to it and knocked it down here. Which means that my Plague Swarm can go after it, but fails to kill it, which is quite comical. Teraton teleports onto this objective, though. Just racking them up. And at the end of that turn, not that much was accomplished. 4 and 3. So I'm very, very close to winning, really, now. My opponent is a bit further away. So, in the next round, I'm almost certainly going to win in this round, because let's see how many more. I need 5 more victory points to win. I'm probably going to be controlling all the objectives, so if I kill anything, and I'm almost certainly going to kill the Mortar this round, so I'm in with a good chance. My opponent is looking at a very long shot of accomplishing anything now. So all he can do is try and score more points and get a bonus tournament point for getting more than 10 victory points. So, I've got an activation, 2 moves, fight, and an extra dice. My opponent has fight, fight, extra dice, splat, and move. I think we've established we're probably not going to kill each other's leaders. Plague Lords are too difficult to kill. My Teraton, well, a Burster was up here, fighting the dog. My Teraton decided, you know what, I want the VP. I definitely want it to end this turn, so I'm going to try and kill as much as possible, even if I lose anything, because my opponent's not going to catch up. So I kill the Burster, and it does actually kill the dog as a result, so we get 1 VP each for that little encounter, and the Teraton is blown off the roof and takes some damage. But I did get the VP for killing the Burster. And my Mortar was attacked by a zombie, took wounds. It was then attacked by a Plague Lord who didn't kill it. How embarrassing is that? So, I then jump onto as many objectives as possible. The Plague Swarm kills the Mortar, so that's worth 3. I'm sitting on that objective, and that objective. I killed the burster, and there we go. So it's not a maximum points win, because I didn't reach 25, but it's, and also I didn't kill the leader. But for top table in round 3, that's a good result. Kept my opponent down to minimal victory point scoring as well by not allowing him to get over 10. And it's looking very healthy in the leaderboard at the moment. I'm definitely in the lead, way out at the moment, with 1 game to go. 3 wins, 2 maximum point games, and then this one, which is obviously much closer. So if we look, I killed almost... Did I actually kill everything apart from the Strider and the Plague Lord? Oh no, there was 1 zombie left, but he was worth no VPs. So I accomplished my goal of killing everything that was squishy to get victory points, and then also using the victory points available on the objectives to score, to win. So I was able to mostly ignore the Strider and the Plague Lord. I did actually attack the Strider with my Plague Lord, but it was kind of a big pillow fight and nothing happened at the end. So, no drama there. So overall, that strategy worked. Sometimes you just have to ignore certain enemy units because you know you're not going to do much to them. So if you can limit what they can do, obviously ignoring them while they're shooting you to death isn't going to work. But if you can find a way to avoid them and prevent them from doing their job, that's great. I did have a couple of units set on fire at one stage, so the burster can actually set units on fire by puking on them, I believe. And I think I had a plague swarm on fire here, which managed to avoid having its activation tied up by fire. But it does remind me that fire is actually a very useful tool in this game, and something I don't really dabble in yet, but I may well do. Next, the next scenario is patrol, which is quite a simple one. You've got a bit of an L shape in the corner of the table to set up, and my Teraton is actually under this building, but it can't be lifted off the table, so it's just sitting there to represent the fact that it's in there. Mortars, dogs, Teraton, a bit cramped again, dog and Plague Lord there. And what's this? The same opponent again? Well, with the Swiss scoring tournament system, sometimes you end up playing the same person twice, and because we were both doing so well after the first 2 rounds, we were both still in 1st and 2nd place after the 3rd round as well. So I've got a decent lead though. So if, for example, this game's a draw, I'm almost certainly going to win the tournament, even if I suffer a narrow loss, because I think we were both dead level on points going into the 3rd round. So if it's a very close loss, then I would still probably win the tournament, because I don't think the lower tables were in a position to really leapfrog me at this stage. So obviously if I take a huge loss that's bigger than the defeat I just inflicted on this same opponent, then obviously that would be enough to dethrone me. So we've got Plague Lord on his own in there. We've got a dog and a mortar. Now if I was going first, that would be a nice little cube to shoot at there. A mortar and a dog, that would be a dream. We've got a Teraton underneath, a burster in there, a couple of dogs on the roof, that wouldn't be a bad cube to aim at as well. HMG and a zombie, I think there's a grenade launcher in there. But I've lost the recon roll again, so my opponent's going to go first. And the victory points in this scenario, you can see there's a 2-point objective there on the ground, a 2-point objective on a half cube up there, a 1 point in this corner, and there's a 1 point down here as well, in this little corner down there. So, first things first, the dice. I've got activation, move, double shoot dice, which is the dream for turn 1, and a fight, which is not going to come into it probably, so I'm going to have to use that to re-roll something, most likely. My opponent, using some unusual dice here, has got 2 extra activations, 2 shoot, which is not bad for the first round at all. The extra activations while going first means that he can fire off 4 times before I get a chance to do anything, and then a kind of useless fight dice. So what happens immediately then? I think my opponent's mortar missed with everything, which was quite comical. Then my mortars fired back and knocked his mortar off its perch and did 3 wounds and knocked down the dog. So it didn't quite kill it, but it's also pinned obviously, so it's not going to be shooting at me. And so this cube this guy moved up here, this HMG, after my mortars had fired. If he'd set up there with 2 dogs immediately, that would have been a dream cube to drop a mortar on, obviously. The HMG manages to suppress 2 doggies quite easily, and another one of my doggies moves on to the 2-point objective. And the other one is up there. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to reach that one yet. Plague Lord moving up, Plague Swarm moving up, and another dog getting in position around here as well. Just working everything up slowly, getting ready to pounce next turn. My Leaper is knocked down. I think that was probably the grenade launcher knocked it off its perch down here. Actually, what happened was it fell down and then it kept bouncing around between cubes because there wasn't enough capacity in this cube to hold the Leaper, so it bounced off a wall, bounced back in, bounced off a wall, repeatedly kept taking wall damage tests, and then eventually was deposited in there. So thankfully it didn't take any damage, but it's still down. So we've got the Burster moving up, we've got a Teraton ready to strike down there as well. So what I'm waiting for is the stage 1A Plague Lord to move out the way, away from the mortar, and then I can Teraton in there and murder it. So that would be a nice move, if this guy would be kind enough to move. So at the end of the first round, I am 4-0 up at the moment, which is nice. Because again, I don't need to win big, I just need to not lose badly, and the tournament's basically mine. So I've got 3 move dice, which is pretty good if I want to be getting into the action now. A shoot dice and a fight dice. So not bad at all. My opponent's also got 3 moves, a splat and an activation. And the Strider steams in there onto the 2-point objective, kills the dog that was on it, and then sets fire to the Plague Swarm. So that's not very nice. Then the enemy Teraton, with the activation dice, teleports in, kills my Leaper that was down, then uses a move dice to jump onto the mortar that was also down, and killed that. So my stage 1 Plague Lord had to come back there and kill the Teraton. So that Teraton did a decent job there. Accumulated quite a few victory points, but then paid the price. So my mortar then kills the enemy grenade launcher, I think. Yep, there he is. Which is nice. And I've got 2 dogs up onto this 2-point objective, which I only do, obviously, after the enemy have finished shooting at them. So I'm going to score for that. And those are our kill piles at the moment, so I've lost a little bit more. I've got a dog on this 1-point objective as well. So I'm doing well to score. I've got Teraton waiting down here, ready to strike at that mortar. And my opponent's mortar, because I'm not able to go after it yet, because the Plague Lord is still there, it decides to climb up onto the roof again, since it can't shoot yet. So that's how we're looking. This area is looking pretty strong for my opponent with the Strider there. The Plague Lord has actually moved here now. So when I go first in the next round, the first thing I'm going to have to do is get this Teraton out of the way, so it doesn't get eaten by the Plague Lord. And I've got my other Teraton here. So, it's pretty close. My opponent's on 11. I am on 13. So, very close indeed, which is exactly the kind of game I'm fine with. Again, as long as I don't get massacred, I should win the tournament. 2 move dice. Activation. Shoot. Fight. Nice balance there. My opponent's got activation, 2 fights and 2 moves. So no shoot dice, which is good. I get my Teraton away from the Plague Lord so it doesn't get eaten. Punch the Burster, do some damage. Don't kill it though. My Mortar finishes off the enemy Mortar, which is really nice. So that's dead, getting me some more nice VPs. The Strider jumps up and kills... I think there was a dog there. Let me just check. What was there? It may have actually been the Teraton that it killed. We'll find out. No, it was a dog. And then it jumps down and kills... Well, it wounds the Plague Swarm. And then the Plague Swarm tries to escape, because I want to charge my Plague Lord into this Strider. But the Plague Swarm actually gets killed by the fire that was on it from last time. So Plague Swarm, death by fire. Wow, wow, wow. The Plague Lord under here, my enemy Plague Lord, punches my dog, uppercuts it off the 2-point objective and kills it. And you can see here that the zombie has jumped onto this 1 point objective, the enemy dog has gone onto the 2 point objective. So I do ultimately get my Plague Lord into combat with the Strider, but don't do anything to it. I've still got a dog over there on that objective, and overall it's a very even contest at this point, but my opponent has actually just scored enough points to win the game here with the 1, 2, 3 points there. No one's holding that one, and I've only picked up 1. So the fact that the dog was punched off the objective means that my opponent takes the game 20-18, which, as far as I'm aware, with my limited knowledge of the leaderboard before this round, should be enough for me to win the tournament. No leaders were killed, and obviously we just played. We were equal. We've had 2 games against each other now, and I won by a larger margin. So that should be enough to secure me the tournament. So, obviously, these are 2 pretty well balanced against each other lists. There are certain models that are very difficult to kill for each side. The Plague Lords and the Strider are very difficult to take out. I've got Supremacy with mobility with the Teratons, and the Mortars kind of balanced out by the HMG and the Grenade Launcher, so I'd say the shooting is quite equal. I've got Dog Supremacy. Overall, I've got the slight mobility edge. My opponent's got the slight toughness edge, I would say. And it led to 1 win each. But I can reveal that it was enough to land me first place. So my opponent did actually finish second, though, as a result of defeating me in the final round there. So both on the podium, both got a prize. And the prize I chose from the prize pool was... I'll just get it in my hand here, which you can't see, but it's a copy of the Dreadball latest edition game, which has the Yundage versus the... I think it's the robots, what are they called? Yeah, Neobots. Yep, so all the rulebooks, obviously. I've already got the rulebook and lots of playing mats, but why not? It's nice. Then I'll have to decide what to do with it, whether I actually use it or give it away or what, but we'll see. So, very nice tournament, a nice scoring system, I think. And the fact that playing against the same person twice is usually not a highlight for tournaments, because obviously you want to play a variety of people. However, I think the 2 factions, or well, the 1 faction, the 2 lists that we made were quite evenly matched, so it ended up with 2 pretty good games, particularly this last one that was closer. So, no complaints from me. The first, well, game 2 was obviously a bit of a slaughter in my favour. It didn't last very long at all. My opponent didn't get the chance to do that much, because a lot of his good stuff was just dead immediately. Game 1 was a bit closer than that, but I did manage to rack up 1 billion victory points in it. Zoltan says, good job, with a picture of a trophy. Yes, sadly there wasn't a trophy at this event, but there's a trophy in all of our hearts for my victory, I'm sure you'll agree. And I was actually thinking, I think it could be the most amazing thing ever, or it could be the saddest thing ever. Because when I look at the trophy shelf of mine, and I see them all lined up there, and the certificates and the medals, I think, yes, when I look at this, this is a representation of all the events where I have finished in 1st, 2nd or 3rd place. However, there are gaps in it, because certain events don't have trophies at all, or medals, or certificates, and some events don't have trophies or certificates or medals for anything below 1st place. So there's always that little temptation thinking, maybe I should just like print out my own certificate and just perch it next to them, just to show how much of a winner I am. And then I think, no, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard in my life. So I am torn on that. I only think there's 2 events, I think, that fall into that category. There's this one, where obviously I finished 1st, and there was a Kings of War one, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where I actually finished 2nd, but there was no trophy for it. I think it would have been my first Kings of War trophy, had there been one available. And there was never one in my collection. So, something to ponder, I think. Anyway, this is going into my tournament wins playlist, which is nice. I didn't put the last Kings of War ranked tournament in there, even though I technically won best overall, because I also technically finished second on the rankings, so I'm not putting that down officially as a win, even though I got the crown. So that didn't go in the playlist. This one is going in the playlist, because there's no disputing it. Finished first, can't argue with that. And obviously, it was a fun time for all concerned, I'm pretty sure. And I also can't question the legitimacy of it based on my quality of opponents, because if you look at the final leaderboard, I played second place twice, and the other two players I faced ended up finishing, I believe, 4th and 6th. So I didn't beat anyone that ended up lowly down there in the table. So I think this list works very well. It was built to defeat ciphers with missile launchers, that's exactly what it did, but it also did a good job against other lists. There were lots of Forge Fathers at this event, so maybe slightly disappointed I didn't get to face any of those, because they are cool, and most of them had the new, what's it called, is it the Juggernaut? The thing that's not quite an Iron Ancestor, but looks similar. Looks really cool though, so I'd like to face one of those at some point. However, the other big news, as far as me and Deadzone, is that I'm considering starting a new faction, because these Plague, as cool as they are, they were painted on a whim, because I was trying to sell them on eBay, and this would have been quite a few years ago now, before I went to my first Deadzone event, obviously. I was trying to sell them, they weren't selling, so I thought, you know what, I'll just paint them, and give it a go and see if I like playing it. So I painted them, thought they looked okay, played a few games, and then was hooked. However, that does mean that they were painted a long time ago and not that much effort went into the actual quality of the paintwork. So when I see all the amazingly painted strike forces that my opponents are bringing to the table, and my fellow players, and I see on Facebook, I haven't got anything new for Deadzone for quite a while. My Rebs are okay, but I was never really feeling them particularly, so I'm not too obsessed with diving back onto the Reb wagon, so I'm thinking about starting a new faction and actually putting in some effort and painting them really well. So I have to decide which one it's going to be. I've got some Forge Fathers. I'm not that crazy about them though. And especially since I already do, in Age of Sigmar I do Caradron Overlords, so small dwarfy people that would end up being quite similar. So I've been looking at the factions. There are elements of the Asterians that I like. I particularly like the Matsudans, the lizard aliens that team up with the Asterians. I'm not that obsessed with the rest of the Asterians though. So if I could do an entirely Matsudan list, I'm not sure how feasible that would be because they only have a few choices. And there's also the opportunity to create an army that kind of grows into a firefight faction as well, which I don't really want to do with the Plague, because I don't want to paint a billion more models in this kind of mediocre painting standard. So I'd rather start something new and make them all really nice. The Marauders, the Deadzone Orcs basically, have just got some new releases. I've never been that keen on their aesthetic, so I really need to think about it. I'm not a huge fan of the Veermin. Don't particularly like Enforcers. I don't like the GCPS, I think they look too generic. What do I think about the Nameless? I'm not too crazy about the Nameless either. Yeah, so I'm a bit limited in choices. Not sure about Maison Labs, since they're really just Plague with extra stuff in. And what else is left? So let me know in the comments what kind of Deadzone faction you would like to see me attempt next, and I'll think about it. It's going to take a long, hard think, and contemplation will be required, and then eventually we'll see what happens as a result of that. Next event I've got lined up at the moment is a Kings of War one at the end of this month, so I might be able to take Night Stalkers to that, which would be exciting, and there are more Deadzone events lined up for later in the year. I think I'm booked in for another 2 at the moment, I believe. One of them is the UK Deadzone Championships, which is going to be fun. And yeah, if you know of any other events around the place that I might not have heard of, feel free to let me know as well. And I believe that is everything. So before I go, don't forget to check out all the links in the description, obviously. Let me know what you thought of this video, if you want to see more Deadzone shenanigans, if you want to see Firefight even. And don't forget, if you want to keep this channel afloat during these dark, turbulent times, then feel free to pledge all your life savings into the Patreon to keep the juicy content flowing forth. Obviously, the more percentage of the world's life savings end up in my Patreon account, the more incentivized I am to start firing out non-stop red-hot, sizzling, succulent, tender, moist, finger-licking, good, dishlicious content into your face, via your taste buds, of course, so that you can sample all of the delights of the content this channel puts out. And with that, I think all that remains to be said is, good night out there, whatever you are.